A typical suburban residence transformed into a nightmarish dwelling, with blood, chilling to the core, splattered across the walls. As a haunting final detail, a tiny child's handprint remained. This was the grisly sight that greeted Jennifer O'Brien when she entered her parents' home to retrieve her son, Nathan. The case was so macabre and disturbing that many found it difficult to accept it as reality. Nevertheless, it had indeed occurred, and the entire nation closely monitored the ensuing investigation. This narrative transports us to Park Hill, a neighborhood situated within the city of Calgary, Canada, renowned for its tranquil ambiance and the endearing qualities of its local inhabitants. Park Hill boasts a scenic setting, featuring well-kept residences, streets adorned with trees, advanced infrastructure, parks, and a hospitable atmosphere. The area emanates an aura of serenity, rendering it a sought-after location for numerous families. These attributes captivated the Lickness family, drawing them to Park Hill. Alvin Lickness, a cherished grandfather and father at the age of 66, held a position of authority within both his family and his professional life. The gentleman was eagerly anticipating the chance to embark on a fresh chapter in his life following his retirement. His spouse, Kathy, aged 53, served not only as the family's cornerstone and a dedicated wife, but also as her daughter's closest confidant. Her nurturing disposition enabled her to fashion a warm and inviting space for all her cherished ones. Park Hill had been their residence for numerous years, and now the couple had decided to downsize slightly, purchasing a more compact home in Edmonton. Alvin and Kathy Lickness were on the cusp of savoring their retirement. They listed their property for sale, along with some of their furniture and interior items, as they commenced packing for the relocation. The impending challenges did not daunt them. After a hectic day, the weary but contented husband and wife found comfort in the laughter and playful antics of their grandchildren, as well as the encouragement of their friends. Their daughter, Jennifer O'Brien, visited her parents' abode for the final time with her sons, including the jovial 5-year-old Nathan. In a mere week, her parents were slated to depart from this place permanently. Jenny felt a tinge of sadness about this, as it was the place where she was raised and spent her childhood alongside her 4 siblings. Alvin and Kathy had acquired an apartment in Mazatlan, where they intended to spend the winter basking in the balmy Mexican sun before journeying to Edmonton, but they were not fated to relish their golden years. Merely a day later, the couple's genuine aspirations would transform into a chilling, desolate haze, enveloping everything in its vicinity. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. Nathan O'Brien was a lively youngster with a cherubic visage and perpetually tousled, sun-kissed hair. He was the middle sibling among Jennifer's 3 offspring. Owing to his affinity for superhero attire and his amiable disposition, this little boy was adored and recognized by everyone in his vicinity. He effortlessly forged friendships with both his peers and their parents, and was an indefatigable explorer of all things novel. Jennifer and the children had a delightful time at the family residence in Park Hill. As the day was drawing to a close and darkness was descending, Jenny resolved to stay overnight to avoid driving in the dark with 3 children. Nathan, who had been frolicking in the fresh air, drifted off to sleep instantaneously, while the youngest child, Max, couldn't settle down in the unfamiliar bed. At 11:15 in the evening, Jenny decided to take her 2 sons home, leaving Nathan to slumber next to his mother, intending to retrieve him in the morning. The crux of the matter was that Nathan had long yearned to stay overnight with his grandparents, and she didn't want to deprive him of such an opportunity. On June 30th, 2014, Jennifer arrived at her parents' abode in the morning to collect her son, but what she was about to witness was beyond comprehension. The front door of the house was wide open, and when the woman peered inside, she saw puddles of blood, and there was a heavy odor of death permeating the air. Blood was ubiquitous, on the beds, on the walls, on the floor. In the hallway, there was a crimson trail of someone's sneakers and bloody smeared stripes, as if someone had been dragged. The most heart-wrenching sight, imprinted on the wall, was the handprint of a small child's palm, as if the boy had leaned his hand against the wall to keep from falling. To Jenny's horror, there were no signs of her parents or her 5-year-old son in the house. She promptly called her husband and exclaimed that she thought her entire family had been slain and their bodies taken. Then, in hysterics, Jennifer dialed the emergency response number and repeated the message. The dispatcher instructed the woman to urgently get into her car and lock the doors, in case the potential perpetrators were still somewhere in the house or nearby. Jennifer sat behind the wheel of her own vehicle, gazing at the family home where she had experienced so many joyful moments, and the image of the wall with her son's handprint was seared into her mind. She couldn't fathom the reality of what was transpiring. The police swiftly arrived at the scene and burst into the house, which resembled a scene from a horror movie. They conducted a meticulous search of all the rooms but found no bodies. The grandparents and little Nathan had vanished without a trace. After an Amber Alert was declared, an extensive search commenced for the missing trio. The police hoped, until the last moment, that their kidnappers were holding them somewhere, despite the horrific scene inside the residence. Law enforcement collected DNA samples throughout the Lickness home, but among them, not a single DNA fragment or fingerprint of a potential perpetrator was found. During the collection of forensic evidence, investigators discovered a tooth in the estate, presumably belonging to Alvin, the homeowner. The blood found on 20-kilogram dumbbells lying in the garage also matched his genetic material. The lock on the side door had been broken, suggesting that whoever had brutally murdered the 3 people had entered the house this way under the cover of night. Officers also questioned about 200 people who attended the estate sale. Initially, many Calgary residents thought it was something akin to a custody battle, that the grandparents had taken the boy away for some reason and didn't want to return him to his parents. The public simply wasn't informed about the horrors that had transpired in the house. When hundreds of police officers, tirelessly searching for the missing family, found no trace of Nathan and the Lickness couple anywhere, they returned to square one, their family home, holding on to the faintest hope of finding at least the boy alive. Detectives hypothesized that perhaps the child had witnessed something that terrified him, and he had rushed to hide but couldn't get out on his own. In meticulous attempts, they searched all the closets, storage rooms, and looked under the beds, everywhere Nathan could have concealed himself. But he wasn't there. For a couple of weeks, the police still clung to the belief that the Lickness couple and Nathan were being held somewhere, and that the injuries they sustained in their own home might not be fatal. But as the days passed, hopes diminished. All this time, the trio was being searched for, but no bodies were discovered. It was becoming evident that this was not a kidnapping, but more akin to a massacre of 3 family members. The perpetrator remained at large. The police department held several press conferences where they finally informed the public that a violent attack had transpired at the Lickness home. All they had was a house with puddles of blood and too many unanswered questions. The boy's parents, not allowing themselves to think that their child might not be alive, addressed him directly from the TV screen. They reminded Nathan that he was a superhero and could handle anything, that they would find him very soon and bring him home. Jennifer, addressing her son, implored the boy to be strong and not be afraid, and people who heard her words had tears in their eyes because, unlike the mother, they had no such certainty that the child was alive. Everyone understood the misfortune of the grief-stricken parents, but didn't know how to help them. The Amber Alert did not yield any concrete results. Over 1,300 reports were received from various locations over the course of several days. People in nearby homes and businesses tried their best to help solve this horrific crime. They sent archives of video recordings from that night to the police. There were so many that it caused the police department's computer system to crash. Detectives analyzed hundreds of hours of surveillance footage, identifying suspicious patterns until, at one point, something barely perceptible caught their eye. On the night of Alvin, Kathy, and 5-year-old Nathan's disappearance, a vehicle was spotted circling the Park Hill area several times. In one video frame, a person was captured lurking near the Lickness residence in the pre-dawn June morning. Shortly thereafter, a pickup truck was seen moving north toward the town of Airdrie. In the bed of the truck lay an object covered with white material. Law enforcement immediately distributed flyers with a photo of a late 1980s or early 1990s Ford F-150 pickup truck that had been seen on the street where the Lickness family lived on that fateful night. Detectives were searching for the vehicle and the driver who might have had information about the three missing persons, Nathan and his grandparents. Publishing this image proved to be a very astute move. A woman who recognized the truck contacted the police. Patty Garland was certain she had encountered this vehicle before. A strikingly similar truck was parked at her parents' house when she visited there the day before, accompanied by her common-law husband, Alan Lickness, whose parents and nephew were missing. The owner of this truck was Patty's brother, 56-year-old Douglas Garland. In his youth, Douglas was expelled from medical school for cheating after he had a mental breakdown. He was repeatedly arrested for carrying weapons and assault, but no charges were brought against him. Essentially, he got away with it all. Douglas had previously been convicted in 1992 when a drug lab was discovered on his farm. Facing arrest and to avoid imprisonment, Douglas fled to British Columbia and hid under the identity of Matthew Kemper Hartley, an Alberta teenager who had died in a car accident. Under this assumed name, he lived there for 7 years, worked in a lab, and when he was fired, he filed for unemployment benefits and calmly received money while hiding under a false name. In 2000, authorities arrested him and sentenced him to 6 months in prison for drug trafficking and identity theft. Psychologists attributed his crime to mental illness, essentially considering him a person incapable of violent actions. As a result, he was released after 6 months. In July 2014, police again detained Douglas Garland at a bus stop and placed him in jail, citing a previous charge of forging documents. He was very quiet and told the police nothing. An extensive search of Douglas's property was immediately authorized, given the concern that the Lickness and Nathan were alive but in danger. The police didn't even wait for a search warrant. It was a legal exception under emergency circumstances. The emergency response team launched a potential rescue operation. As part of a hostage rescue operation, they were to storm the 16-plus hectare farm where Douglas lived with his elderly parents. It was the most serious lead. Concealing someone in a rural setting is easiest. However, neither the living nor the dead were found on the farm. The only thing that caught their attention was a barrel near the greenhouse. Something was smoldering in it. Inside the tank, there was nothing but ash, no blood, no physical evidence, and Douglas had to be released on bail under strict conditions prohibiting him from approaching the farm. At the same time, law enforcement obtained a warrant for a thorough search, and more than 300 officers combed every foot of the vast area, nearby fields and wetlands. While other specialists inspected the premises on the farm, detectives found books and a manual containing horrific graphic images deep in the basement. Upon further searching, they found boxes filled with handcuffs, some of which were small enough to hold a child's hands. Further findings included hacksaw blades, leather belts, bone saws, knives, guns, and a straitjacket. Authorities also stumbled upon a computer hard drive hidden under the basement rafters. This hard drive contained a lot of painstaking research on violence. Douglas had downloaded a plethora of instructions for himself from the internet, for example, how to attack his victims early in the morning to ensure the element of surprise, information on painful torture methods, and guides on how to take a person's life without experiencing emotions. Among the literature on the shelf were books on poisoning and violent crimes. There were also images of his alleged intimate fantasies and obsessions. Douglas had a real fetish for adult diapers, and there were several photos of men and women with their hands and feet tied, wearing these diapers, and possibly killed. There was also a set for impersonating a woman in the dungeon, a set of breast prostheses, 2 wigs with long blonde hair, hangers with women's clothing, as well as an extensive shoe collection of 89 pairs of various boots, shoes, and sneakers that fit Douglas. There was also an empty shoebox in the closet. The sole imprint could have been compared to the imprint in the Lickness house, but unfortunately the sneakers themselves were nowhere to be found. What law enforcement didn't find were the bodies. They literally searched the area on their knees, elbow to elbow, making their way through the tall grass all over the site. But it was all in vain. Meanwhile, without much thought, Douglas did violate the bail conditions he was supposed to follow and returned to the farmhouse without the knowledge of the Calgary police. Detectives kept him under surveillance. They suspected that upon returning to his own basement, he would try to get rid of any evidence. His second arrest occurred as Douglas was making his way through dense thickets of trees and shrubs, with a police helicopter circling over his head. He was charged with the murders of Nathan O'Brien, Kathy, and Alvin. 2 weeks had passed since the disappearance of the people. Despite the absence of bodies found, Douglas was charged with a whole series of offenses, supported by a staggering amount of evidence, 1,400 pieces. Whether this man was actually the one who carried out the terrible attack in the middle of the night on Alvin and Kathy, not sparing even 5-year-old Nathan, was yet to be determined. The police, without halting, continued the investigation. They decided to examine the contents of the smoldering barrel they had noticed during the initial search of the farm. Sifting through the ashes from the barrel, forensic experts stumbled upon a shocking find. Among the hot coals, a baby tooth, charred flesh, a metal frame from glasses, and numerous fragments of human bones were discovered. A subsequent investigation revealed that there was a multi-layered and confusing history between Douglas Garland, Alvin, and Kathy Lickness that spanned several years. Patty Garland, Douglas's sister, who reported the truck to the police, was the common-law wife of Alan Lickness, one of Alvin and Kathy's sons. A key detail that caught the attention of investigators was that the two men had worked together several years earlier. When Alvin, a successful businessman, was looking for a partner to work with, his son Alan suggested Douglas as a potential candidate. This was back in 2006. Douglas, who had some education and practical skills, collaborated with Alvin in developing a pump for the oil and gas sector. It was Lickness's invention, and he hired Douglas to make various improvements to the pump. However, this project was never implemented, which led the businessman to decide to terminate Douglas's employment. The relationship between the two partners ended in early 2007, when Douglas simply stopped answering calls. Alvin patented the pump they had worked on with Douglas, but never received any money for it. So Douglas's grievance was literally built on an empty space. It can't be said that he was cheated out of millions of dollars. Having lost his job, Douglas became incredibly angry. The dismissal fueled a deep-rooted resentment that turned into bitterness that filled his mind for several years and apparently reached a climax, turning into a horrific massacre of his imaginary enemy's entire family. It is assumed that Douglas had no plans to hurt Nathan, but he was not going to leave any witnesses to his crime either. This soulless individual was not confused by age. He had a goal to avenge the insults inflicted on his pride. In January 2017, Douglas Garland stood trial in a crowded Calgary courtroom where he entered a plea of not guilty to all 3 charges. Throughout the entire hearing, he did not file any motions. The sensational trial sent shockwaves through the entire nation, with the public following the case like no other criminal proceeding across the country. Just a day before their disappearance, Alvin and Kathy were hosting a garage sale, preparing to sell their property and downsize to a smaller home. They were scheduled to leave this house permanently a week later to begin enjoying their well-earned retirement. Douglas had little time remaining and decided to act swiftly. For years, Douglas had harbored a grudge against Alvin Lickness over a patent for a pump they had collaborated on. The fact that the device was never sold and ultimately did not generate a single cent did not concern Douglas. His resentment and anger had been festering for all these years, and on that day, June 30th, 2014, he finally decided to execute his plan and set his sinister scheme in motion. Early in the morning, Douglas broke into the Lickness residence by drilling the lock on the side door. Instructions on how to bypass such locks were also discovered on Douglas's computer hard drive. While the entire family was sleeping soundly, the intruder made his way to the master bedroom where Alvin was sleeping and struck him multiple times with something resembling a heavy club, then proceeded to the guest bedroom where, according to the DNA found, the grandmother and grandson were sleeping. Judging by the copious amount of blood, the woman also suffered a blow from a blunt object, but the exact nature of the weapon was not determined. The cause of Nathan's injury could also not be precisely ascertained, but bleeding had unquestionably occurred. Despite the substantial amount of blood in the couple's home, forensic experts were persuaded that all three were still alive when Douglas dragged them out of bed and shoved them into his truck. Most likely, he was transporting the bound bodies in the back of the pickup truck, concealed with a white cloth that was spotted on surveillance footage. The criminal left no DNA traces or fingerprints, as judging by his internet search history, he had previously studied detailed instructions on how to accomplish this. The man then headed with his three victims to the spacious house on his parents' farm, located over 20 miles away, where Nathan and his grandparents encountered the most unimaginable horrors. The DNA of all three were found on various torture devices, meat hooks, bone saws, and knives. Genetic material matching all three victims was also discovered on the outside of a pair of rubber boots near one of the outbuildings on Douglas's farm. Furthermore, a bloodied light switch inside the building matched the DNA profiles of both Lickness spouses. A forensic computer expert testified about the discovery of photos of Kathy and Alvin among the deleted files on a hard drive belonging to Douglas. The criminal had been monitoring the lives of his so-called enemies through social media. Douglas's own mother also testified in court against her son, describing him as a solitary individual who had absolutely no friends, but the elderly woman added that her son was an intelligent person who loved to read books and helped around the house. She said that Douglas had earned a Bachelor of Science degree in college and then transferred to the University of Alberta, although due to a nervous breakdown, he only studied there for a month. When the woman saw a television report about the disappearance of the three Lickness family members and informed Douglas of the news, he stated that he did not wish to discuss Alvin. Unfortunately, she did not hear her son leave anywhere that night when all three went missing, so she could not provide the court with anything specific. His own sister Patty made her son photograph her brother's pickup truck and sent the pictures to the police. It was her actions that led investigators to solve the case. However, the defense attorney, as anticipated, insisted that there was no specific evidence, neither forensic nor scientific, that would indicate that Douglas was in the Lickness home on the night of the attack. No one saw or could confirm that it was the defendant who took the lives of the boy and his grandparents. There was not even any information as to why these three met their demise. According to the defense, he should be completely acquitted. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video. It's really important. On February 6, 2017, towards the end of the trial, the prosecution presented one of the key pieces of evidence that they stumbled upon by sheer chance. The primary evidence in this case literally descended from the heavens. At 9:30 in the morning on July 1st, 2014, the day after the incident at the Lickness residence, a small plane belonging to an aerial photography company was flying over Airdrie airspace, mapping the city and two other small suburbs of Calgary. It was capturing images every 3 seconds, and by an almost incredible coincidence, it took two photographs that would later be presented as evidence in court and largely conclude the case against Douglas Garland. The photographs depicted three torsos lying face down on the ground near three sheds south of the main house. Two of them were clearly adults, completely naked except for some white fabric wrapped around their waists. Most likely, considering Douglas's fetish, these were adult diapers. Experts were even able to determine the approximate height of these individuals. Two bodies were 6'2" inches and 5'6" inches tall, and the third was much smaller. The small figure was lying on its side in the grass, curled up next to a burn barrel. Presumably, the remains of the adults were decapitated. The pilot of the aerial mapping plane testified that when he flew over the farm again 26 hours later, the bodies were no longer visible in the photographs. In this tragic case, the silence of the deceased echoes loudly. There were no bodies left, only tiny fragments. The sole confirmation of their existence on this planet was buried in the ashes left in the burn barrel. The bits of flesh and bone belonged to 5-year-old Nathan and his grandparents. It appears that after dismembering the bodies, the murderer decided to incinerate them, undertaking a grim process resembling cremation. While the horrific details of the monstrous crimes were being revealed in court, Douglas seemed unfazed and even made some notes to himself. He never exhibited any remorse for his actions. None of the victims' relatives were able to testify at the trial, but the written statement of Nathan's father, Rod O'Brien, resonated through the courtroom. In the letter, the man said that they did not have enough time to enjoy the company of their boy, and now they do not even have the opportunity to bury him properly, as there was practically nothing left of him. After several hours of traumatizing testimony and approximately 10 hours of deliberation, the jury reached their verdict for the defendant. The judge presiding over the case of the horrific triple murder in Calgary showed no mercy. He sentenced Douglas Garland, convicted of the deaths of Nathan O'Brien, his grandmother, and grandfather Alvin and Kathy Lickness, to the harshest possible sentence: 3 25-year terms without the chance of parole for 75 years. Theoretically, Douglas would have to be 129 years old before he could apply for a pardon. On the day Douglas was sentenced, he was assaulted by several inmates in prison and suffered serious injuries. After that, he was repeatedly subjected to abuse by other convicts for the killing of 3 innocent people, including a 5-year-old boy, over a senseless grudge that had occurred several years earlier. The heartbreaking events that unfolded in the Lickness and Nathan case had a profound impact on families and society as a whole. The void left by the loss of Alvin, Kathy, and young Nathan was immeasurable. The consequences of this tragedy resonated not only in the courtroom, but also in the hearts of those who knew and cherished this family. Words cannot describe the pain experienced by the parents of the deceased boy. Although they communicated with the press daily, they both refused to discuss any details of the horrific crime. Jennifer and Rod cope with difficulties day after day, raise their 2 sons, and try to adjust to life where their little superhero is absent. In the face of unimaginable grief, Nathan's parents, Rod and Jennifer, found a way to channel their pain into something positive. They established the Nathan O'Brien Children's Foundation, which is a beacon of hope and is recognized for transforming the lives of children in disadvantaged conditions. Their mission is to honor the memory of the deceased boy by providing other children with opportunities to live, hope, and fulfill their aspirations. Nathan loved sports, so the founders of the foundation annually organize sports events for children, teaching them to play hockey, imagining how the boy would have enjoyed participating in these competitions. Another thing Nathan loved was talking to his father before bed. Their last conversation will forever remain etched in Rod's memory. His son began to ask his dad what heaven was like, which was quite strange to hear from a 5-year-old child. But Nathan dreamed of being a superhero and soaring through the sky, cutting through the clouds with his hands. He told his father that he would meet them in heaven when they passed away. Rod even thought that his son somehow sensed that this would happen soon. Nathan's mother, Jenny, watches with tears in her eyes as her son's friends grow up, knowing that she will never see her boy as an adult. The Lickness and O'Brien case is a tragic chapter in Calgary's history, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of not only the city's residents, but also the entire country and the whole world. May the story of the untimely passing of Alvin, Kathy, and little Nathan be a poignant reminder that we need to cherish our loved ones and strive for a world where kindness triumphs over cruelty, meanness, and anger. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon.